prison. A place where freedom dies, where every second feels like an eternity. Behind walls built to crush the human spirit, the world's most dangerous criminals are locked away, forgotten by society. Steel bars, watchful guards, and impenetrable fortresses. A web of security so tight, escape should be impossible. But what if it wasn't? What if, hidden in the shadows of despair, someone found a way to defy the odds, to outsmart the system, to break free from the unbreakable? Tonight we dive into the stories of those who dared to dream of freedom when all hope was lost. Stories of cunning masterminds, daring risk-takers, and the chilling ingenuity of men and women who refuse to stay behind bars. This is no ordinary tale. These are the most unbelievable escapes from the world's most dangerous prisons. And as we unravel each spine-tingling account, one question will haunt you. What would you do to break free? The Great Escape. Alcatraz. The year was 1962. Alcatraz. The name alone was enough to stop a man's heart. A place so brutal, so isolated, that it became the final resting place of the criminal soul. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress, surrounded by cold, unforgiving waters, steeped in fog, and guarded by armed men who believed no one could ever escape. The prison was designed to break even the most hardened criminals. Its walls were thick, its towers manned by some of the most vigilant guards in the world, and its location, cut off from the mainland, meant that any attempt to flee was not just impossible, it was suicidal. Yet on a foggy night in June 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, didn't just survive, they vanished. For months they worked in secret. The sounds of chisels and scraping were masked by the everyday noise of the prison, and no one ever suspected what was unfolding right under their noses. They began by digging through the plaster walls of their cells with improvised tools, spoons, nails, and hacksaw blades. It seemed impossible, even absurd. But in the darkness of their cells, the trio made slow, deliberate progress, tunneling into the walls that seemed impenetrable. The guards walked by every day, oblivious to the slow, quiet excavation taking place behind the thick stone walls. But getting out of the cells wasn't the hardest part. It was escaping the whole island. As the days dragged on, the men grew closer to their goal, but there was still so much to do. Behind the walls, they'd discovered a maze of tunnels and vents that led up to the roof. Yet they knew that the real danger lay ahead. In the dead of night, the prison would go to sleep, but the island's towering walls, the razor wire fences, and the open waters stood between them and freedom. On the night of June 11th, 1962, the time had come. The moon was hidden by thick clouds, and the heavy San Francisco fog hung in the air like a blanket. The trio had carefully crafted makeshift rafts from old raincoats, desperate for any way to float across the choppy, icy waters that surrounded Alcatraz Island. With their plan in motion, there was no turning back. Quietly, they emerged from their cells, their hearts pounding in their chests. As the prison slept, they climbed through the tunnels they had painstakingly created over months, each movement deliberate and silent. When they reached the roof, they took one final look at the imposing fortress behind them before slipping over the side, dropping down into the yard below. No alarms, no gunshots. The night swallowed them whole. They made their way to the water's edge, where the rafts waited. The icy currents of the bay seemed to mock them. How could men who had lived their whole lives behind bars ever survive the frigid waters, the crushing exhaustion, and the relentless waves? But there was no time to question fate. With nothing but their determination and a raft made from discarded raincoats, they launched themselves into the bay. The hours passed like days. The water was merciless, biting into their skin, their limbs numbing as they fought the current. The sound of the water splashing, the wind howling. It was all they could hear as they drifted, alone in the dark expanse of the bay. By morning, the prison discovered they were gone. Alcatraz had been breached. The entire island went into lockdown. Guards scrambled, helicopters circled, and the FBI began its search. But in the end, there was no trace, no bodies, no rafts. It was as if the men had never existed. Some believed they had drowned in the icy waters of the bay, their bodies pulled into the deep, never to be seen again. But others whispered something darker, something that couldn't be explained. What if they had made it? What if they had vanished into the world, free at last? To this day, no one knows the answer. The mystery remains unsolved. Alcatraz, the place where no one could escape, was proven wrong. But was it truly escape, or something far more haunting? The escape of Henri Charrière, Devil's Island. Imagine a place so remote, so desolate, that no matter how hard you tried, you would never find a way out. Devil's Island was one such place, a penal colony so brutal, so isolated, that its very name became synonymous with suffering and despair. Convicts sent there were not just punished, they were left to rot. And in 1933, Henri Charrière, a man wrongly convicted of murder, found himself cast into this nightmare. But Charrière, a man who refused to break, wasn't about to let his fate be sealed by the darkness of Devil's Island. For years, Charrière endured unimaginable hardship. Isolated, beaten, starved, and subjected to brutal work details, he never lost sight of the one thing that kept him alive: escape. But escape from Devil's Island was not something anyone had ever pulled off. The guards were merciless, and the ocean surrounding the island was filled with sharks. No man had ever made it out alive. Yet Charrière's spirit was unbroken. At night, when the sounds of the island had died down, he began his secret work. Quietly, in the shadows of his cell, he began to carve pieces of wood from the old furniture and contraband he could gather. With his limited supplies, Charrière fashioned the rudiments of a raft, a flimsy creation that was his only hope of freedom. Days turned into months. Every step had to be perfect, every movement calculated. One wrong move and he would be caught, dragged back into the depths of the prison where escape would be impossible. The island became a prison within a prison, but Charrière's resolve never faltered. He knew the risks. If the guards found out what he was doing, they would kill him on the spot. But he couldn't stay. He would rather die trying than live another moment under the thumb of this hellish place. And then, one fateful night, it happened. The raft was ready. With everything in place, Charrière made his move. As the guards made their rounds, oblivious to the danger that lurked in the shadows, Charrière slipped away. He crawled to the water's edge and launched the fragile raft into the choppy seas. For days, he battled the treacherous waters. Winds howling, the sun beating down on his sunburned skin, hunger gnawing at his insides. The raft was barely holding together, the wood creaking under his weight as he paddled with nothing but sheer will. But Charrière refused to give up. He was a man driven by one simple truth: freedom. Finally, after days that felt like an eternity, Charrière washed up on the shores of Colombia, exhausted, battered, but alive. He had escaped Devil's Island, but the story didn't end there. Charrière's survival and eventual flight from the island didn't just mark the end of one chapter in his life. It marked the beginning of a new life entirely. He would go on to tell his story, to share the account of the most daring escape the world had ever known. But even as he lived out his days in freedom, the question remained: could anyone else survive such a journey? And was Charrière's escape truly his alone? Or had he been guided by some unseen force, a whisper of fate urging him toward the one thing he had lost all hope of: freedom? The ingenious escape of Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. The very name conjures images of power, fear, and unimaginable criminal genius. He wasn't just the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. He was a man who knew how to evade capture, how to outsmart the law, and how to escape the very prisons that sought to contain him. But it wasn't just his intelligence that made his escape so legendary. It was his ability to plan, his ability to see the impossible and make it happen. In 2015, after being captured, Guzmán was sent to Altiplano, a maximum security prison in Mexico, one of the most secure in the world. It was built to hold the most dangerous criminals, to make sure that no one, not even someone with Guzmán's wealth and power, could escape. But that's where Guzmán's brilliance shone. He had always known that prisons were only as secure as the people running them. And in Altiplano, he found a way. With help from his loyal associates on the outside, Guzmán arranged for an elaborate tunnel to be dug, right beneath his cell. This wasn't a simple hole in the ground. The tunnel was an engineering marvel. The digging was done with such precision that it was practically invisible to the guards and the surveillance cameras. Guzmán had orchestrated the entire operation from the inside, using his vast network of contacts to ensure every detail was perfect. When the night came, Guzmán was ready. As the guards patrolled the prison, Guzmán slipped into the tunnel and crawled through it, his heart racing, his every breath a calculated risk. The tunnel stretched over a mile, long enough for him to evade the eyes of the cameras and the guards. As he emerged from the other side, into the darkness of the night, Guzmán knew the stakes. The world would be searching for him. But this wasn't the first time he had made the impossible happen. What followed was a search that spanned continents. But Guzmán had already disappeared, once again slipping through the cracks, leaving behind nothing but a trail of questions. Some said he had help from deep within the government. Others claimed he had a secret escape route planned long before his capture. But no matter the explanation, one thing was certain. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán had once again escaped the unescapable. And even as authorities hunted him down again, one question loomed large. Could anyone ever keep him locked away for good? The cold-blooded mastermind. The escape of Clive the Brain Palmer. There are criminals who run, there are criminals who hide, and then there are criminals who plan. And if you've heard of Clive the Brain Palmer, you know exactly what kind of criminal he was. Known for his cold-blooded cunning and meticulous planning, Palmer was infamous not just for the crimes he committed, but for his audacity. And when he was finally caught and thrown into the notorious HM prison Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, England, the world thought it was over for him. Parkhurst was a fortress, a maximum security prison where even the most dangerous offenders were kept under constant watch. Its walls were thick, its guards vigilant, and its location far from the reach of the world's eyes. But Palmer, a man who thrived on scheming and outwitting his enemies, had something the authorities didn't count on: a network of loyal followers on the outside. And from the moment he was incarcerated, he began planning his greatest escape yet. For years, Palmer lived quietly, blending in with the other prisoners. He kept his head down, made the occasional misstep to throw off suspicion, and stayed out of the guards' radar. But beneath the surface, his mind was working relentlessly, orchestrating a plan so bold, so elaborate, it seemed destined to fail. Except it didn't. The escape plan was like something out of a Hollywood film. Palmer's followers, posing as construction workers, somehow gained access to the prison. They worked on the grounds, under the very noses of the prison staff, slowly setting the stage for the unthinkable. The most shocking part? Palmer himself wasn't simply waiting in his cell for the moment to strike. No, he had the foresight to disguise himself as a prison worker, infiltrating the building from within. No one suspected a thing. The night of the escape came like any other. The sky was pitch black, the only sound the hum of the distant sea. But in the shadows, Palmer moved with the grace of a man who knew the system inside and out. He'd managed to time the guard rotations, ensure that the security cameras would be disabled at precisely the right moment, and that the perfect escape route would be open for him to slip through. In a matter of minutes, Palmer was out of the prison and in the hands of his waiting accomplices. A fast getaway car, cleverly disguised, whisked him off into the night. He was free. For months authorities hunted him down, but Palmer was nowhere to be found. There were rumors, whispers of sightings across Europe, but nothing solid. The authorities were left embarrassed, their pride shattered. And to this day, Palmer's escape remains a chilling reminder of how even the most secure prisons can be outsmarted. Palmer's name lives on in the criminal world, not as a mere prisoner, but as a legend, an escape artist whose cold precision defied every expectation. He vanished, and with him, a trail of unanswered questions. Had he really disappeared for good, or was he living among us, still plotting his next move? The prison break of the century, the escape of Richard Lee McNair. Sometimes, the most remarkable escapes come from those who aren't even trying to escape at all. And that was exactly the case for Richard Lee McNair, a man whose name became synonymous with ingenuity, audacity, and one of the most bizarre escapes in prison history. McNair wasn't the usual criminal. He wasn't the kind of person who had a master plan or a network of conspirators. No, McNair was a man who simply saw an opportunity and seized it. The story of his escape began in 1987, when McNair was serving time for a robbery. In the midst of his incarceration, he wasn't planning anything, until he noticed something that would change his life forever: a simple flaw in the prison's security. McNair was being held in the high-security facility of the U.S. Penitentiary in Pollock, Louisiana, a place where escape was virtually impossible. But McNair wasn't a man who saw barriers. He saw challenges. He was known for his creativity, his ability to think outside the box, and his fearlessness. And when he saw the opportunity to escape, he took it. It all started with a simple flaw. The prison had one tiny, seemingly insignificant security breach: a ventilation system that wasn't being properly maintained. McNair, with his sharp mind, saw the potential. And with the right tools, a box of pens, a few creative hacks, and a bit of luck, he crafted a plan that was nothing short of brilliant. One fateful night, McNair made his move. The guards had no idea what was happening as he crawled through the air ducts, inching his way toward freedom. It wasn't just a desperate sprint to the gate. No, McNair was calm, controlled, and methodical. He knew the system. He knew exactly when and where to move, and how to avoid detection. The guards would never suspect that the quiet man in the cell block would make a break for it. And then, in a moment that seemed too surreal to believe, McNair was out. Through a hidden passage in the ventilation system, he emerged onto the prison grounds. He made his way through a series of back corridors and, with the help of a makeshift uniform, managed to blend in with prison staff as he walked right past the guards. No alarms went off. No one suspected a thing. For 16 years, McNair lived in the shadows, using his wit and creativity to stay one step ahead of the authorities. He traveled under assumed names, living in plain sight, making small adjustments to his appearance whenever he felt the heat. But, like any good criminal story, his luck eventually ran out. In 2006, McNair was finally captured, not through an elaborate manhunt, but due to his own mistake. He was recognized in a McDonald's restaurant after a member of the public noticed him and alerted the authorities. It wasn't McNair's escape that was the most extraordinary part of his story. It was how he managed to evade capture for so long. And even though he was caught, the legend of his escape lives on, proving that sometimes, It's the smallest of mistakes that lead to the biggest breakthroughs. Was McNair lucky? Or was he simply a man who knew how to take advantage of any opportunity, no matter how small? The Maze of Madness. The escape of John Dillinger from the escape-proof jail. John Dillinger. A name that echoes in the annals of criminal history, feared and revered in equal measure. Dillinger wasn't just a gangster. He was an enigma, a man who knew how to outsmart the authorities at every turn. He became a legend in the 1930s, notorious for his bank robberies, but perhaps his most impressive feat wasn't a crime. It was his daring escape from a prison that had earned a reputation as escape-proof. It was in 1934 when Dillinger found himself behind bars once more, this time in the notorious Lima Correctional Institution in Ohio, a place where many criminals had tried and failed to escape. The prison was said to be secure, with reinforced walls, multiple levels of surveillance, and guards who had seen it all. No one had ever broken out of Lima. But Dillinger wasn't just anyone. On a hot, oppressive afternoon, when the walls of Lima seemed to close in on him, Dillinger made his move. Using a clever ruse, he convinced a fellow prisoner that he was ill and needed medical attention. When the guards led him to the infirmary, Dillinger seized his chance. He had already smuggled in a wooden gun, one so expertly carved that it could fool even the most experienced officers. With his wooden gun in hand, Dillinger stunned the guards. He forced them to hand over real weapons, took control of the situation, and made his way to the exit, calmly, without raising an alarm. As he walked past the prison's iron gates, no one suspected the man who had become a symbol of fear in the American Midwest. And as Dillinger disappeared into the world, it wasn't just the prison that was left in shock. It was the entire country. How could someone like John Dillinger, someone with no fear of consequence, escape a place like Lima? The answer remains a mystery, but one thing was certain. Dillinger was more than just a criminal. He was a master of escape, a man whose name would go down in history as one of the greatest escape artists to ever live. The tension continues to build, with each escape growing more daring, more complex. Every time it seems like the escapees are cornered, they find a way out, leading listeners to wonder, how far will these prisoners go? And what will it take for them to finally be caught? Stay tuned for more stories of the world's most unbelievable escapes from the deadliest prisons, where the line between the impossible and the extraordinary continues to blur, leaving only one question: who will be the next to break free from the shackles of fate?